Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 28th of June of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And probably the most important and the most interesting update is that the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, attacked the city of Dnipro, and the Russians used for this special weapon. Not just a missile or not something like a drone, the Russians used bomb, real bomb. So in this video, for example, we can see the consequences and the work of Ukraine air defense. The Ukrainian sources are saying that as a result of air defense strike, they managed to bring this bomb down. So the Russians used the new Kab by the name of Grom-E1, has flown to the Dnipro for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation. The Russian airspace forces use a special type of ammunition, guided gliding bombs Grom-E1. In terms of range, they are 3 times greater than standard caps. The 600 kilos guided bomb Grom-E1 has a range of up to 120 kilometers. So if we calculate the distance, the Russians attacked the city of Dnipro with aircraft, obviously, and they attacked the city of Dnipro, let's say somewhere from the area of the city of Energodar or Tokmachka. This is very important because the Russians, since the beginning of the special military operation, were able to attack the city of Dnipro just with Iskander missiles, with Granit drones, with cruise missiles, which is very expensive. And now we see that the Russians found a solution how to attack the most important city of Ukraine, the city of Dnipro, with just the regular bombs, which means that the Russians will be able to use them a lot. They will be able to use hundreds of these bombs probably every single week, which obviously can lead to complete collapse of economy, to complete collapse of logistics through the city. Because there are 2 important cities in Ukraine, the city of Dnipro and the city of Zaporizhzhia, and there is a very rich network of railways around both settlements, and the Ukrainians use these railways with the purpose to supply their forces in the vicinity and in the area of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, in the Slaviansk agglomeration, in the city of Konstantinovka, so in every single town and settlement where the Russians right now are advancing. So these 2 settlements are very important. And I would like to remind you that several days ago the Russians launched their offensive operation in the Zaporizhzhia direction, and for example, during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their positions once again. They took under control several structures, facilities, streets and strongholds of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of the settlement of Kamenska and in the vicinity of the village by the name of Stepova. So the Russians continue advancing, and the main purpose of this Russian offensive operation, according to my understanding of the situation, is to get as close as possible to the village of Grigorovka. So of course there are too many kilometers. It's still a lot of job to do for the Russians, but obviously this is the main and the priority for the Russian forces, to get this red line. If the Russians are able to take under control everything here, then the Russians would be able to establish complete FPV drone control over the main supply lines that go from the city of Zaporizhzhia in the eastern direction, and this is going to be basically complete collapse and complete blockade of the city of Zaporizhzhia. More precisely, the Russians will be able to cut railways that goes further in the eastern direction. But obviously, without control over the roads in the vicinity of the city of Dnipro, the Russians will not be able to destroy Ukraine logistics completely. But this new bomb, this new technology, will allow the Russians, first of all, to establish control over the southern roads with FPV drones and with bombs over the city of Dnipro. And obviously, from this very moment, Ukrainian logistics will collapse, or at least will suffer huge losses and will suffer huge problems during the major offensive operation of the Russian forces, or during the major battle that is about to be started. So let's continue with this area. Once again, the Russians continue their offensive operation. They're trying to advance in Kamenska. So in this area, the Russians during the previous 12 hours and 24 hours managed to discover several FPV drone positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the vicinity of the settlements of Kanevska, Marivka, and as a result of strikes with FABs and more missiles, these settlements and these positions were also destroyed. So the Russians are advancing. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the area of the city of Orekhov. As for this territory, today we got lots of very interesting videos, and according to geolocations, we understand where exactly the Russians are attacking right now. First of all, the Russians are trying to finish the battle for the village of Belogoria. Once again, for the first time probably since the beginning of this year, we got a video from this area, and in this video we can see obviously something like artillery preparation. We see how the Russians are bombing and attacking the village of Belogoria with all types of calibers they have, which means that the Russians are going to continue their offensive operation with the purpose to take this village under complete control and to maintain the lines between the villages of Lugovskoye, Belogoria, and the eastern part of the settlement of Tokmachka. So the Russians will try to secure this pocket. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the area of Tokmachka itself. The Ukrainians during the previous days tried to bring as many as possible forces in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation, but the Russians controlled the situation, and when they discover another Ukrainian unit, they destroy them as soon as possible, as fast as possible. So in this video we can see how Russians establish complete FPV drone control over the western part of the city of Tokmachka, trying not to allow the Ukrainians to bring forces to this area of the former prison in the southern part of Tokmachka. As for the former prison, as you can see, the Russians are bombing and attacking this territory heavily. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were basically reducing this former prison to ruins, and obviously this video of how the Russians are trying to destroy this former prison confirms that the Russians began artillery preparation, and maybe these upcoming hours the Russians will begin their major offensive operation with the purpose to answer the former prison and to begin assault operation of the underground facilities. So something tells me that due to the situation, the Russians are about to take this territory under complete control, and with the fall of the Tokmachka former prison, the Russians will be able to create a very powerful stronghold with the purpose to continue advancing further in the direction of the city of Orekhov. So as you can see, the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction remains tense, and we see that the Russians control the initiative in their hands. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dnipropetrovsk direction. During the previous video we discussed that the Russians answered the northern part of the settlement of Zherka. We discussed this video during the previous update, and in this video we could see how Russian forces answered the village of Zherka and how the Russians began moving from one building to another, from one construction to another, and it was very interesting to see because later I analyzed this video in details and I came to the conclusion that Ukrainians didn't show any resistance. We haven't seen even a single rifle shot from the Ukrainian side, which means that by the time when the Russians answered the village from the north, Ukrainians most likely abandoned their positions completely and left the village of Zherka further in the western directions towards the settlement of Tolstoy and Pidubne. So right after we got this report with Russian soldiers moving in the northern part, we got another video published by the Russian sources, and this is the video that was published by the Telegram channels that have affiliations with the group of forces East, and in this video we can see how exactly the battle for the village of Zherka have been taking place. In this video we can see lots of episodes how the Russians were bombing and attacking the settlement, and of course, as usually in the final part of this video we can see lots of scenes, lots of episodes of how the Russians were raising their flags in different parts of the settlement of Zherka, in the southern part, in the central part, and of course in the northern part of the settlement. Based on this video we have colored the village of Zherka completely in Russian favor, because now we have no doubts that the Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory, and that the Russians are able and are going to move further in the western and the northwestern directions. So let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation, for example, by the end of the 27th of June of 2025. Yesterday we got report that the Russians just answered the northeastern part of the settlement of Zherka, and today we got these changes. According to them, the Russians secured the territory completely. So the Ukrainians were forced to fall back, and most likely without any pause the Russians are going to move further. As for now, we have lots of geolocations. More precisely, we continue receiving lots of geolocations from the village of Mirna. The Russians, as you can see, established complete FPV drone control over the territory, and everything that answers the village of Mirna is being destroyed by the Russians immediately. Also, the Russians are bombing and attacking this territory with artillery. So we expect that the Russians are going to move in the area of the settlement with the purpose to establish complete complete control over the territory, and this is going to happen in the very near future. So we see that there is something like a breakthrough. We see that Ukrainians, despite let's say their attempts to stabilize the situation, haven't managed to do anything with this, and Ukrainians continue retreating. Furthermore, today several pro-Russian resources reported that by the end of the 28th of June of 2025, the Russians finished the battles for the settlements of Novopavlovka and Dachne. So according to pro-Russian resources, these two villages were also captured by the Russians by the end of the 28th of June. Several sources reported and adjusted their map significantly in this pocket. The Russians secured almost completely this pocket and got the border between Dnipro region and the Donetsk region. So once again, summarizing everything, by the end of the 28th of June of 2025, the Russians managed to get this red line, which means that the battle for the settlement of Novopavlovka is about to be started. And now we see and we understand that most likely the battle for Novopavlovka is going to be very important and very difficult battle for the Russians. The Russians will try to attack the settlement at least from 4 directions, from the south and southeastern, from the eastern and the northeastern directions. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. But obviously we are about to see the battle for very important settlement, because Novopavlovka is the first settlement, huge settlement on the territory of the Dnipro region. So this is not Zaporizhzhia region, this is not Donetsk region, this is already the Dnipro region, and the Russians are going to onto not just this territory, they're going to take a very powerful settlement. If Russians are able to establish control over this territory, this will allow the Russians to get a foothold which they can use for further concentration of forces. The Russians need to concentrate forces if they want to move further in the northwestern direction, deep inside of the territory of Ukraine. So very interesting situation. Let's wait and see. And another important thing, that today several sources reported that today we're going to receive some updates from the village of Moravka, also about Russian progress, but yet we haven't received anything. Maybe tomorrow we're going to receive additional updates, but something tells me that the village of Moravka was also captured by the Russians. Right now maybe the Russians are about to finish this process. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the area of Pokrovsk, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. Today we got lots of very interesting updates from the southwestern part. Several sources reported that the Russians secured the territory to the north of the village of Zherka. So along this river, so this small foothold was captured by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. As for now, without proofs, so we're waiting for them. And today the Russians began offensive operation in the southwestern part of the city of Pokrovsk. In this video we can see how Russians managed to discover positions and some concentration of Ukrainian units, and then the Russians began bombing and attacking them with TOS flamethrower system. And according to several sources, the Russians decided to check the situation and send some forces in this area. If the Russians see that Ukrainians show no resistance, obviously the Russians will continue with the purpose to establish complete control over this strategical elevation that is located in the southwestern part of the city of Pokrovsk. This strategical elevation can allow the Russians to probably establish or to get some initiative in their hands, at least in the southwestern part of the city. Now let's talk about the N32 roads. Today we haven't received almost anything, but a very interesting video I would like to point your attention is coming from the settlement of Shakhova. So this video shows us approximately the situation in this area. I would like to remind you that during the previous days, the Russians, with the use of Grom drones, managed to destroy almost every single bridge in this area, and this situation led to complete collapse of Ukrainian logistic. And after the Russians destroyed and damaged bridges, they established something like a FPV drone patrol over these territories. And for example, in this video we can see lots of episodes how a group of Russian FPV drone operators established complete control and patrol over the destroyed bridge or damaged bridge, and how the Ukrainians were trying to use this damaged or destroyed bridge for logistic purposes, and how the Russians just during one video destroyed up to 6 or 7 vehicles that Ukrainians were trying to use in this area. So this is the current situation. The Russians used hundreds of drones for the purpose to control the area along N32 road. At the same time, Russian forces are trying to advance on the ground. As for the Kibane pockets, today we have two important updates. First of all, the Russians improved their positions in the direction of the road 0524. This is the changes on the ground that were recorded according to several mappers, and according to geolocation, the Russians improved their positions in the pocket along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. In this video, we can see two Russian soldiers that were moving quadricycles with the purpose to establish control or to answer some positions. These are the Russian soldiers. You can see them. Maybe the video quality doesn't allow to recognize them, but these are two quadricycles moving towards Russian positions. And the video is very long, and at the end, the Russians answered these three lines, this one under very heavy fire of Ukrainian artillery forces. So let's compare the map between the changes. This is the situation before this video was published. So by the end of the 27th of June, and this is the situation by the end of the 28th of June. The Russians are about to finish the battle for this pocket. Maybe the Russians already finished, but we haven't received geolocations that can confirm this. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal to the north of the city of Chasiv Yar. As you can see, according to several pro-Russian resources, the Russians secured the area on the Russian side of the canal itself, and the Russians are about to consolidate their positions along canal on the Ukrainian side in the vicinity of the settlement of Markova. We discussed the situation in the previous videos. We were discussing and made a conclusion that most likely the Russians would try to improve their positions with the purpose to increase the front line that can be used in the future to attack the city of Konstantinovka from the east and from the northeast. As for the Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Volchansk. If you remember, several days ago, we discussed that the Russians crossed the river of Volcha and established complete control over this territory. And we came to the conclusion that either the Russians did this because they wanted to destroy Ukrainian positions below the bridge, or the Russians crossed the river because they decided to begin offensive operation in the direction of the western Volchansk. And we haven't received anything during the previous days, and today we got first video from the western part of the city. And this video is very important because this video tell us about everything. In this video, we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking the western part of the city of Volchansk with everything they have. So this is an attack with the use of the TOS flamethrower system. The Russians were attacking the western part of the city of Volchansk, this industrial region, the area with a purpose. This is something like artillery preparation. We expect that right now, this moment, these seconds, the Russian forces are trying to answer the western part of Volchansk, this industrial zone, with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory and to create a strong foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha. If the Russians are able to secure the western part of Volchansk, especially this industrial zone, this is going to be the beginning of the end of the city of Volchansk and the complete Ukrainian control. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sumy direction. Currently, there are very heavy clashes in this area. The Ukrainians launched another counter-offensive operation, but this time the Ukrainians are using lots of forces for these purposes, and it looks like another suicide operation from the Ukrainian side, but in comparison with the previous suicide operations, the Ukrainians are trying to improve their positions and they're not going to count their losses to do this. The Ukrainians, according to information we have, tried to attack in the direction of Novopavlovka, but the Russians discovered the concentration of Ukrainian forces, and as a result of FPV drone counterattacks, the Ukrainians suffered losses, and this attack failed without being even started. In the eastern direction, the Ukrainians were trying to attack in the direction of Kondratovka, Andreevka, but the Russians controlled the situation around the settlement with aviation, and the Russians were bombing and attacking every single square kilometer with FAPs, with artilleries, with FPV drones. Ukrainian attacks in this area also were repelled, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back. Furthermore, according to information we have, Ukrainians were trying to counterattack the Russians in the area of Yablunovka and Yunakivka. For these purposes, Ukrainians were using tanks, armored vehicles, and infantry. The Russians also managed to discover the movements of Ukrainian vehicles, and the Russians began bombing and attacking Ukrainians with a significant number of FPV drones. Ukrainians suffered losses, and this attack also was repelled. Another attack of the armored forces of Ukraine was started some somewhere in the vicinity of the settlement of Satki. The Ukrainians were trying to improve their positions, but the Russians, as a result of FPV drone attack, destroyed another road of Ukrainian offensive. So the question is why the Ukrainians are so active in this area, why the Ukrainians decided today on the 28th of June to begin this counter-offensive operation that failed, as you can see. And the question and the answer to this question is coming from the city of Sudzha. According to information we have, the first DPRK Sappers have arrived to clear mines in the Kursk region. I would like to remind you that several weeks ago we discussed that North Korea is going to send 1,000 sappers and 5,000 engineers in the Kursk region with the purpose to help Russians to carry out their offensive operation in the direction of the city of Sumy. Obviously, 6,000 engineers and sappers is a very powerful force that can do lots of things along the line of combat contact, and the most important, they can do this very fast. So that is why the Ukrainians decided to counterattack, because they wanted to restore control for as many as possible territories with the purpose to win some time before the Russians in full strength with the North Korean troops will begin their major offensive, probably with the purpose to answer even the city of Sumy itself. So as you can see, the situation here is very complicated, and now when the North Koreans arrive, the situation is going to be like a real disaster. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.